So I think we've all been there at some point, right? You're standing in front of this just like incredibly majestic sunset,
Oh, absolutely.
and the colors are literally exploding in the sky, and you think, I want to paint this, or at least, I want to try to. You want to capture that incalculable life on a canvas. But then reality hits.
The canvas fights back.
It really does. It cruelly gives you this flat, plastic, dead surface. It ends up looking like a cheap cardboard set from a middle school play. Or, I mean, it's the exact same disappointment as when you're looking at a breathtaking valley and you pull out your smartphone to take a photo and the screen just shows you this flat, boring image.
Right. It captures absolutely none of the actual emotion or scale.
Exactly. So why does that happen? That is our mission for today's deep dive. We are unpacking this really fascinating masterclass document from Gruppio Rame, taught by the incredible artist Laura Palacios. And I really want to understand this. Why does our primitive brain force us to draw solid objects with these hard, heavy lines, when what we really should be doing is painting light and air?
Well, that right there is the fundamental question that separates the amateur from the true master. And neurologically speaking, it happens because we're wired for survival. I mean, our brains absolutely need to identify boundaries.
Like finding the hard edges of things.
Exactly. If there's a predator in the brush, you need to know exactly where it starts and where it ends.
Right.
Right. But great art, true elite painting, completely subverts that instinct. So in this visual journey we're taking today, analyzing Palacios' process, we aren't going to give you some boring step-by-step tutorial.
No, please no.
Right. We're getting into the actual optical and psychological mechanics of high-level painting. You're going to see that true depth doesn't come from drawing contours. It comes from building this invisible architecture of pure transparency.
Which is a massive promise. And looking at the notes from this Gruppio Rame masterclass, to fix that flat cardboard landscape problem, we actually have to solve the physical limitations of the paint itself, like way before a single mountain is even painted.
You got to start at the absolute foundation.
Yeah. Because acrylic paint is inherently just this dense, opaque chemical paste in a plastic tube. So how on earth do you make a dead paste radiate the feeling of living, beating sunlight?
Well, the most common perceptive error people make when they start painting is believing the white canvas is the maximum light.
Yeah.
And that your only job is to just, cover it up with colors. But Palacios does something completely different in this document. She seals the canvas right from the first instant.
Wait, she seals it? With what?
She applies this very specific mix of warm white, a little bit of orange, and just a tiny touch of raw umber. It creates an alchemy that's really similar to the historic Naples yellow. And she scrubs it everywhere with a sponge and then aggressively force dries it with a hairdryer.
Okay, wait, hold on. Let's unpack this for a second. Why a hairdryer? And more importantly, why is she covering the whole thing in a color that isn't the sky or the grass or the mountain?
Because she's solving a problem of optical physics. Acrylic paint dries by evaporation, right?
Yeah.
If you put watery paint on a raw canvas, or one that's poorly prepared, the water just sinks straight into the pores of the fabric. The pigment essentially dies. It loses all its luminosity. So by sealing the canvas with that Naples yellow and force drying it, she destroys the porosity. She creates this waterproof barrier.
Oh, so the next layers won't sink in.
Exactly. From that moment on, the future layers, which are going to be very watery, they don't sink. They just float on the surface, highly reflective.
Oh, wow. I totally get it now. So the light isn't sinking into the cloth. It's bouncing off that yellow base underneath. It's like a movie theater or a stained glass window.
That is a structurally perfect analogy, yes.
Because the canvas doesn't have its own light, right? It only comes alive when the projector at the back pushes the light through the image on the screen.
Precisely. That Naples yellow acts as the cinema projector. It's a permanent internal light bulb. It's never going to disappear completely. It just stays hidden, pushing light photons up through all the layers that come later. And this should completely change your perspective on the blank canvas.
It really does. It's not just an empty surface anymore.
Right. I want you to stop seeing it as an empty space to be covered. Think of it as a locked safe of light, and the artist has to carefully uncover it.
A locked safe of light. I love that. Okay, so we have this internal sun turned on inside the canvas. But looking at the next step in the document, we hit this massive physical problem. The canvas is still a flat 2D square.
It is.
So how do you fit miles and miles of massive mountain ranges into a tiny flat space?
Well, here we run into the classic geometric error of human perception. We instinctively think that distance works like a reverse zoom. We assume that if we just draw things smaller, they'll magically look far away.
But they just look like tiny toys sitting on a table.
Exactly. The human brain is way too smart for that. It detects the trick. There's no real scale. So Palacios' solution here is radical. She completely abandons the concept of solid mass.
Wait, how do you paint a mountain which is literally millions of tons of solid rock without solid mass? How do you not draw its edges?
By diluting the material until it almost vanishes. In the Masterclass, she takes earth tones like burnt umber and red oxide and dilutes them with so much water that the dense acrylic actually behaves like a translucent watercolor.
Oh, so it's basically tinted water at that point.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
And with this, she doesn't draw the mountain, she insinuates it using what we call glazes. She leaves entire sections uncovered, completely empty, so that the Naples yellow background can still breathe through. The optical physics here are just fascinating. Each transparent glaze slightly darkens the layer below it, but it doesn't destroy it.
Right.
So she creates planes of depth through atmospheric transparency, rather than drawing hard lines.
It's almost like transparent musical chords. Like you play a note on a piano and the next liquid note you play over it modifies the emotion and vibration of the first one, but it doesn't erase it. They add up.
That's a beautiful way to visualize it. The layers coexist. And that is the true revelation here. Real depth in art isn't built by stacking solid objects behind one another. It's built by layering air and transparency, letting the past and the background continue to exist beneath the present.
Layering air. That is incredibly poetic. And speaking of air, that leads right into the next phase I'm seeing in the process here. We have depth on the ground now in those translucent mountains, but eventually the viewer is going to look up.
They always look up. We reach the sky.
Right, and this is where I've made just a glaring error myself when trying to paint. You take the purest, most beautiful blue directly from the tube, you slap it on the canvas, and the result is a disaster. It looks like a flat, artificial plastic wall, like a swimming pool liner.
It's the ultimate tragedy of chemical pigments. That pure tube blue simply doesn't exist in that concentration in a real sky. Our eyes instantly detect the artificiality of the chemical industry. So to turn that chemical paste into living atmosphere, the master does a mix that completely defies common sense. She mixes cobalt blue, some warm white, and then, crucially and highly counterintuitively, a tiny pinch of orange.
Hold on right there. Orange. If I mix blue and orange at home, knowing they're opposite colors, I'm just going to get this hideous muddy brown, right? Why ruin a perfect blue with orange? And there's something else in the text that blew my mind. It says she paints this diluted sky mixture directly over the distant mountains she just finished painting. Isn't she destroying her own work?
It totally seems like madness, right? But it is actually the highest expression of visual intelligence. Let's start with the color. Orange is the complementary color to blue. By adding that minuscule pinch, she isn't making mud, she's humanizing the blue.
Humanizing it?
Yeah, she strips away that synthetic saturation and turns it into natural, breathable air. And as for painting over the mountains, the physical logic is impeccable. It's called atmospheric perspective. Think about physical reality for a second. When you look at a mountain range 10 miles away, you aren't actually seeing the rock.
Because it's too far.
Because your retina is looking through 10 miles of dense oxygen, humidity, fog, illuminated dust. All of that is physically between your eye and the stone.
Oh, wow. So you're literally seeing the air itself.
Exactly. Aerial perspective dictates that distant objects get swallowed by the atmosphere around them. They lose contrast and they visually recede. A true master doesn't paint the solid object in the distance. They paint the heavy, invisible air that separates us from it.
Painting the oxygen, that totally changes how I think about a landscape. But okay, as the viewer's eye travels forward, getting closer to the foreground where we're supposedly standing, that romantic fog isn't going to cut it anymore.
No, up close, the human brain gets demanding.
Yeah.
It wants texture, it wants tactile information.
And this is the deadly trap, right? The taxidermy trap. Trying to meticulously paint every single leaf, every branch, every perfect blade of grass.
And the result of that microscopic obsession is always a stiff, rigid image.
Hey.
It ends up looking like, exactly as you said, a taxidermy animal. Every hair might be in the perfect place, but it has absolutely no vibration of life. So to avoid this death by detail, Laura Palacios radically changes her strategy and her tool in the foreground. She drops the soft brushes and the watery glazes, and she picks up a comb brush.
A comb brush, the one with the stiff bristles separated like little teeth?
That's the one, and she changes the chemistry. Less water, way more thick pigment. She brings in chrome green, cadmium yellow, some magenta. But the key is the movement. Instead of continuous strokes, she applies these rhythmic taps, little strikes that intentionally leave gaps. And as she moves to the absolute front, she injects spots of pure, warm cadmium yellow right next to the colder colors.
Oh, leaving intentional gaps. Wait, I think I see what's happening. This is, for everyone listening, this is identical to when you get really close to a digital screen or a TV.
Yes, exactly.
When you look closely, it's not a perfect, smooth image. It's thousands of individual pixels vibrating. The artist isn't wasting time mixing the perfect green on her palette. By using that comb brush and leaving gaps, she's letting those underlayers peek through.
It's an excellent way to explain optical color. Physics tells us that warm colors, like that yellow, optically expand and jump forward into our retina. While cool colors contract and pull back, she is directly manipulating your optic nerve. By placing those temperatures side by side, she isn't rendering the final image on the canvas, she's delivering the raw data and forcing your brain to do the rendering.
That's incredible. The colors mix inside the observer's mind.
Right, and this leaves us with a profound lesson. The elite image isn't born from exhausting detail. It comes from trusting the viewer's mind completely to weave a living tapestry out of vibrating spots of color.
I really love that trust in the viewer. But I have to play devil's advocate for a second. Reading this analysis, I actually had a genuine concern. If everything in this painting is transparent oxygen and air and spots of color vibrating in our minds, don't we run a huge risk? I feel like the whole painting could just float away into a blurry dream. It lacks weight.
That is a crucial point. It's a very common error in landscape painting. Without a deep, dark structure, all that light and air has absolutely no meaning. It has no tension. We need gravitational anchors. And Palacios' solution here is to introduce an immensely dense tone in the foreground, Payne's gray.
Okay, Payne's gray.
It's a dark, very heavy color, a gray that borders on black, but with a cold, bluish soul. She applies it with these aggressive strokes at the base. And then she executes what I honestly consider the master stroke of the composition. She hides tiny, isolated dots of red oxide deep inside the massive fields of green grass.
Right. I noticed that in the notes, something scientific about this. What is simultaneous contrast? Can you break that down in plain English for those of us who aren't pro-painters? Why hide red dots in a green field?
Of course. So when the human eye stares at a large field of green color for several seconds, the photoreceptors in your retina, the cones and rods, experience visual fatigue.
They actually get tired.
Yeah, they get exhausted processing that same exact wavelength. The green starts looking dull and boring. But red is the exact opposite of green on the color wheel. By introducing that minuscule red dot, Palacios violently interrupts the monotony. It acts like a visual electroshock that resets the eye's fatigue, making all the surrounding greens suddenly look impossibly vibrant and intense again.
That is wild. It's like elite culinary science. Like when you're eating a super refined dark chocolate dessert and you suddenly bite into a coarse flake of sea salt.
Yes, perfect.
That tiny pinch of salt makes the chocolate taste 1,000 times more intense. That red oxide is the sea salt of the landscape.
The culinary analogy illustrates it perfectly. It's ruthless visual poetry. It teaches us that for genuinely radiant light and saturated color to exist, they have to be contained and challenged by the absolute maximum expression of darkness and contrast.
It's like she's hacking our nervous system through our eyes. But okay, we are reaching the end of the process documented in this Grupio Rayam Masterclass, and there's one final hurdle. The atmosphere is perfect, the structure is solid as a rock, the salt makes the color vibrate. But human eyes are stubborn. At the end of the day, we demand physical, tactile reality in the foreground to fully believe the illusion. We need to feel the material.
And this is where so many painters would panic and fall right back into the trap of tearfully drawing a little outlined flower.
Exactly, the taxidermy trap again.
Right. So how do you create the hyper-realistic illusion of tactile life without drawing little delineated leaves? The climax of Laura Palacios' work is mesmerizing. She completely abandons the watery glazes and uses pure impasto.
Impasto, meaning just thick, unmixed paint.
Yes, thick, dense paint exactly as it comes out of the tube without a single drop of water. And she just drops, almost with controlled violence, 3 unmixed dots of paint onto the canvas. A volume of pure cadmium yellow topped immediately with a tiny dab of magenta, and finally a spark of vibrant, warm white.
And this is where my head just spins because it is a literal psychological magic trick. You look at it and you know there are no stems drawn, there are no petals carefully outlined. It is literally 3 blobs of acrylic paste sitting on top of each other, dropped with a palette knife or a hard brush.
But your brain doesn't see 3 blobs of plastic, does it?
No. It sees a perfect wildflower catching the afternoon sun.
This is the psychological principle of Gestalt applied to art. The human brain absolutely hates incomplete information. It has an aversion to unresolved chaos. So when the mind perceives the physical volume of that dense paste casting a real shadow, combined with a violent clash of luminous temperature, the yellow against the magenta, the mind assembles everything in a fraction of a millisecond. It constructs the three-dimensional shape of the flower completely on its own.
That is incredible.
The ultimate aesthetic lesson here is that true elite art never stoops to passively copying nature. Great art builds the exact luminous stimuli necessary so that the illusion of life constructs itself inside the viewer's own mind.
What an absolute level of genius. We've reached the end of this journey, and frankly, my whole understanding of how a painting works has just been dismantled and rebuilt from scratch. Just to summarize the immense mastery of this text from Laura Palacios and JPO Arime, today we learned how to avoid the flat cardboard drawing by diluting paint to insinuate rather than demarcate.
Abandoning solid mass.
We understood how to paint dense oxygen using blue and orange. We discovered how to hack visual fatigue with that red oxide sea salt, and how Gestalt psychology makes our own brains build flowers out of 3 blobs of impasto. But really, the most important thing, the master key to this whole work, is that this landscape only breathes because that initial invisible sealed layer of Naples yellow was there all along, like a heart pumping light from the absolute bottom.
It's a process that completely redefines the way we look at things. For those of you who've joined us on this deep dive, I guarantee you something. From this moment on, you will never look at a landscape painting the same way again.
Never.
Honestly, you'll never walk through a real valley or a forest the same way. You won't see solid objects anymore. You will see heavy atmospheric layers, pixels of optical color vibrating right in front of you, and all those constant tricks where light pushes back against the dark.
Totally. We definitely aren't going to settle for the flat version of a sunset on our phone screens anymore, and we won't see a simple cardboard set. Now we see the invisible architecture of light. And to close out this deep dive, I want to leave you all with a thought that's been bouncing around in my head for a bit, something for you to explore on your own, kind of building on that final Gestalt principle we just talked about. Think about this. If our brains are such powerful neurological machines, so desperate to find visual meaning that they can instantly turn 3 minuscule blobs of layered acrylic paste into a perfectly real, indisputable wildflower, then how much of the quote-unquote real world that we walk through every day, the streets, the sunsets, the distant valleys, the faces of people, is actually a solid and objective outside of us, and how much of that entire universe is simply our own brain, locked in the dark of our skull, frantically painting reality for us every single millisecond.